He had imagined this moment 100 times on the flight home. The quiet driveway, the lights glowing softly through the tall windows, the comfort of knowing that everything inside his mansion was exactly where he left it. Control, order, loyalty. That was how Ethan Caldwell lived his life. As a billionaire businessman, he believed success came from planning every detail and trusting no one blindly. But the second he stepped through his front door, something felt wrong. The house was too quiet. Ethan had just returned from a week-long business trip overseas. The meetings had gone well. Investors were satisfied. His company's expansion deal was nearly finalized. On paper, everything was perfect. Yet as he set his suitcase down in the marble hallway, a strange tension settled in his chest. He wasn't supposed to be back until tomorrow. He had changed his flight at the last minute, deciding to surprise his family. His 2 children were upstairs, probably finishing their homework. The staff should have been wrapping up their evening duties. And Maria, the maid who had worked in his home for 3 years, would likely be in the kitchen, preparing tomorrow's breakfast arrangements. Maria had always been quiet, respectful, invisible in the way the best household staff often are. She came early, left late, and rarely asked for anything. Ethan appreciated efficiency. He valued loyalty even more. But as he walked deeper into the house, he noticed the living room lights were off. The air felt heavy. A lamp flickered near the staircase. That's when he heard it. A soft sound. Not laughter. Not conversation. Something else. He moved slowly, his polished shoes silent against the floor. The sound was coming from the study, his private office, the one room in the house that was strictly off-limits to everyone. His jaw tightened. No one entered that room without his permission. Not the staff. Not even his children. The door was slightly open. Ethan felt his heartbeat in his ears as he stepped closer. For a brief second, he wondered if someone had broken in. But the security system hadn't sent any alerts. The gates were locked. The guards outside were still on shift. He reached for the handle and pushed the door open fully. And then he froze. Maria was standing inside his study. Not cleaning. Not dusting. She was standing in front of his desk, staring at something on the screen of his laptop. His laptop, the one that contained confidential business contracts, private financial records, sensitive information that could destroy partnerships if exposed. Maria looked up the moment she heard the door move, her face drained of color. For a split second, neither of them spoke. Ethan's mind raced. Betrayal? Corporate espionage? Had someone planted her in his home? Had she been reporting to a competitor all along? But there was something in her expression that didn't look like guilt. It looked like fear. Real fear. "Sir," she whispered, her voice shaking. Ethan took a step into the room, his eyes shifting from her to the laptop screen. Whatever she had been looking at was still open, still glowing in the dim light. "You weren't supposed to be back," she said quietly. The words echoed in the silent room. And that's when Ethan realized this wasn't just about a maid standing in the wrong place. This was about something much bigger, something that had been happening inside his own home while he was away. And whatever Maria had just discovered on that screen, she clearly hadn't meant for him to see it first. Ethan's eyes slowly moved to the laptop screen. It wasn't a business contract. It wasn't a financial report. It was a folder he had hidden deep inside his private files, labeled under a coded name no one in the house would recognize. Maria stepped back as if the distance between them could protect her. "I can explain," she said, but her voice sounded smaller than usual. Not the calm, steady tone he was used to hearing in the mornings. Ethan closed the door behind him. Not loudly, just enough to seal the room. "You have 1 minute," he said, keeping his voice controlled. Years of high-stakes negotiations had trained him not to react too quickly, but inside his thoughts were racing. That folder wasn't connected to his company's public operations. It was tied to something more personal. Something he had quietly started investigating months ago without telling anyone. Not even his closest advisors. Strange transactions. Minor at first. Small amounts transferred between shell accounts. Then larger ones. Someone had been moving money inside his own corporation without triggering the usual alerts. It was clean, careful, almost invisible. He had assumed it was a rival executive, or a board member testing his authority. He never once imagined the trail might lead back to his own home. Maria swallowed. "I wasn't looking for anything," she said quickly. "I came to leave the mail on your desk." The screen lit up when I touched the mouse. I saw the open files, and you decided to read them? Ethan finished, his eyes narrowing. She shook her head. "No, I saw a name." That made him pause. "What name?" he asked. She hesitated. For the first time since she'd worked here, she looked at him directly, not as an employer, but as a person carrying something heavy. "Caldwell Foundation transfer," she said quietly. Ethan felt something shift in his chest. The Caldwell Foundation wasn't just another account. It was a charity set up in his late wife's name, the one dedicated to children's education and medical support. The foundation he protected fiercely, both publicly and privately. "What about it?" he asked, his voice lower now. "There were withdrawals," Maria said, "large ones, from the Children's Scholarship Fund." Ethan's jaw tightened. He already knew about those numbers. That was why the folder existed. But hearing it spoken out loud, inside his own study, felt different. "How do you even know what a foundation is?" he asked. Maria looked down at her hands. "Because my sister applied last year." The room fell silent. "She didn't get the scholarship," Maria continued softly. "I understood. There are thousands of applicants. But when I saw those amounts missing, it didn't make sense." Ethan's mind flashed back to recent board meetings. His chief financial officer had reassured him everything was balanced. The audit reports were clean. Too clean. "You're accusing someone," Ethan said carefully. "I'm saying someone is using your name," she replied. "And if you didn't know, then you needed to." Her words hung in the air. Ethan studied her face. He had always seen Maria as part of the background of his life. Reliable, invisible. Now he noticed the small details, the tired eyes, the nervous way she twisted her fingers, the fear that didn't look like guilt but like someone who had stumbled into a storm. "If I wanted to harm you," she said quietly, "I wouldn't still be standing here." That struck him harder than he expected. Outside the study, he heard faint footsteps upstairs. His children, unaware of the tension building just below them. Ethan stepped closer to the desk and looked again at the numbers on the screen. The withdrawals had increased over the past 2 weeks, right when he left for his business trip. "You said I wasn't supposed to be back," he said slowly. "Who thought that?" Maria's lips parted, but she didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced toward the closed door, and in that small movement, Ethan realized something unsettling. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of someone else in this house. Ethan followed her gaze to the door. The hallway outside was quiet, but the silence didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like something was listening. "Who?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. Maria hesitated again. "I don't know for sure," she said, "but I've noticed things since you left for your business trip. People coming into the house who aren't part of the regular staff. Meetings in the dining room after the kids go to sleep. Your financial advisor has been here 3 times this week." Ethan's mind immediately went to Richard Hale, his longtime advisor. Richard had been with him since the early days, before the company became a global success. He had helped structure investments, manage assets, oversee the Caldwell Foundation. Ethan trusted him more than most of the board. "Richard doesn't need to sneak around," Ethan said, though the words sounded less certain than he intended. Maria nodded slowly. "Maybe not, but the meetings were quiet. No paperwork left behind. And the last time he came, I heard him say, 'He won't know until the quarter closes.'" The words hit Ethan like a quiet shock. He replayed the last few months in his head. The unusual delays in audit responses. The way Richard had encouraged him to extend his overseas business trip by a few extra days to secure strategic partnerships. The subtle push to focus on expansion instead of internal reviews. Ethan prided himself on reading people. He built his billionaire reputation on understanding risk, timing, and loyalty. But what if the threat wasn't in the market? What if it was inside his inner circle? Upstairs, a door closed softly. The normal sounds of home life felt fragile now. Maria stepped closer to the desk. "I didn't want to get involved," she said. "I just clean. I take care of the house." But I saw your son in the living room yesterday, asking one of the assistants why his school program was losing support. He didn't understand what it meant. He just heard adults talking. Ethan's chest tightened. The Caldwell Foundation wasn't just a charity. It was his promise to his late wife. It was something he wanted his children to be proud of one day. If funds were being redirected, if scholarships were disappearing, it wasn't just financial fraud. It was personal. You should have told me immediately, he said. I tried, Maria replied. Your calls were screened. I was told you were in back-to-back meetings. I left a message to the office, but I don't know if you ever got it. He didn't. A cold realization began to form. Someone had been controlling access to him, filtering information, managing his schedule in ways he hadn't questioned. Why stay silent after that? He asked. Maria's expression softened. Because I have a daughter, she said quietly. This job pays for her school. If I accuse the wrong person, I lose everything. Ethan saw her differently now, not as a maid standing to study, but as a mother trying to protect her own child while working inside a house that suddenly felt unstable. He turned back to the laptop. The transfer dates lined up perfectly with his travel schedule. Each time he flew out for an important business trip, more money shifted from the foundation into layered accounts. Someone had studied his habits. Someone close enough to know when he wouldn't be looking. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking the heavy silence. A message from Richard Hale. Welcome back. We need to talk. Urgent. Ethan stared at the screen. Maria watched his face carefully. Is it him? She asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. His mind was calculating risks, motives, consequences. If Richard was involved, it meant the breach went deeper than a simple financial error. It meant trust had been weaponized. Another sound echoed faintly from downstairs, this time from the back entrance near the security office. A door closing. Low voices. Ethan slowly shut the laptop. From this moment, he said quietly, you don't tell anyone I'm back early. Not the staff. Not the advisors. No one. Maria nodded. For the first time in years, Ethan Caldwell felt like a stranger in his own mansion. The billionaire who controlled boardrooms across continents now had to question the people inside his own walls. And somewhere in the house, or perhaps just outside it, someone was already adjusting their plan, because he had come home too soon. Ethan slipped his phone back into his pocket, without replying to Richard's message. His mind was clear now in a way it hadn't been for months. Someone had been moving money through his foundation. Someone had been controlling access to him. And someone clearly believed he would still be out of the country tonight. He looked at Maria. Go back to the kitchen, he said calmly. Act normal. If anyone asks, you haven't seen me. Her face showed a mix of fear and relief. Be careful, she whispered before leaving the study. When the door closed behind her, Ethan exhaled slowly. The mansion suddenly felt less like a home and more like a chessboard. Every room held a possible move. Every person, a possible motive. He reopened a laptop and quickly copied the recent transaction logs onto a secure external drive he kept hidden in his desk drawer. The transfers weren't random. They were routed through consulting fees tied to a new education outreach expansion project, one it approved in principle but never finalized. The signatures on the digital approvals were his, except he hadn't signed them. His stomach tightened. That meant access to his encrypted credentials. Only 3 people had that level of clearance. Richard Hale, his chief operations officer, and Ethan himself. Footsteps echoed faintly in the hallway again. This time, slower, confident. Ethan shut the laptop and turned off the lights in the study, leaving only the glow from the hallway spilling under the door. He moved quietly toward the side window that overlooked the driveway. A black sedan he didn't recognize was parked near the gate. His security team should have logged any new vehicle. He pulled out his phone and opened the internal camera system. The front gate camera feed flickered for half a second before stabilizing. That half second was enough to tell him something was off. Someone had tampered with the system. His phone vibrated again. Another message from Richard. Why didn't you tell me you landed early? Ethan felt a chill move down his spine. He hadn't told anyone, only the airline and his private driver, who had been replaced tonight by a temporary company driver due to a reported illness. Too many small changes. Too perfectly timed. A soft knock landed on the study door. "Sir," it was Daniel, the evening security supervisor. "Mr. Hale is here to see you." Ethan didn't answer right away. He stepped back from the door and glanced once more at the external drive in his hand. If Richard was involved, confronting him directly could push things into the open too fast. But avoiding him would raise suspicion. Another knock. Firmer this time. "Sir," he says, "it's urgent." Of course it was. Ethan unlocked the door and opened it slowly. Daniel stood there, posture straight, but something in his eyes seemed uneasy. "In the living room?" Ethan asked. "Yes, sir." Ethan walked down the hallway, every step deliberate. The mansion light seemed brighter than usual, almost exposing. As he entered the living room, he saw Richard Hale standing near the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back. Richard turned with a familiar smile. Calm, polished, controlled. "You're full of surprises," Richard said lightly. "Cut the trip short?" Ethan studied him carefully. No visible tension. No panic. Just the same trusted advisor he'd known for years. "I had a feeling I should come home," Ethan replied. Richard's eyes flickered for the briefest moment. "There are matters we need to finalize," Richard said, "especially regarding the foundation restructuring. Time-sensitive. Restructuring. That wasn't the word Ethan had used in any meeting. From the corner of his eye, Ethan noticed Maria standing in the distant hallway, pretending to adjust a flower arrangement, watching, and then Ethan heard it. The faint beep of security override from his phone app. Someone was accessing the vault server remotely, in real time. Richard's phone buzzed in his hand at the exact same second. For a split moment, their eyes locked. No more smiles. No more small talk. Ethan realized this wasn't just financial manipulation. It was a coordinated move, a plan that had expected him to be thousands of miles away. The air in the living room felt heavy, charged. Outside, the black sedan's engine started. Inside, Richard took a small step closer. "We need to talk privately," Richard said, his voice lower now. Ethan didn't move, because he finally understood. Whatever was happening with his company, his foundation, and the missing funds, it was about to reach a point where trust would break completely. And in the silence between them, both men knew. Only one of them was walking out of this conversation in control. Ethan held Richard's gaze for a long second, then nodded slightly. "Fine," he said. "Let's talk." But he didn't move toward the study. Instead, he walked past Richard and into the dining room, a space lined with glass walls that reflected every movement. No closed doors. No hidden corners. If this conversation was going to shift power, Ethan wanted visibility. Richard followed, his polished shoes echoing softly against the floor. The black sedan outside was still idling, waiting. "You've been reviewing the foundation accounts," Richard began smoothly. "I was going to brief you next week. We've initiated a strategic reallocation of assets to protect the Caldwell Foundation from upcoming regulatory changes." Ethan leaned against the edge of the table. "Using my encrypted approval without my knowledge?" Richard didn't flinch. "Your digital signature was authorized under emergency protocol. It's all legal." Legal. That word again. Who triggered the emergency? Ethan asked. Richard's expression tightened just slightly. "Your chief operations officer flagged irregularities in scholarship disbursements. We had to move quickly before it became a public issue. The press loves stories about billionaire philanthropy gone wrong." Ethan felt the room tilt in a direction he hadn't expected. "Irregularities," he repeated. "Yes," Richard said. "Funds were being redirected before we ever touched them." For the first time that night, uncertainty crept into Ethan's thoughts. "That's not possible," he said quietly. "I've been tracking the transfers." "Exactly," Richard replied. "You've been tracking the second layer." Ethan's mind raced. "What second layer?" Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Someone inside your inner circle has been siphoning money from the foundation for nearly 6 months. Small amounts at first, testing the system. We discovered it 2 weeks ago." Ethan's thoughts immediately went to the encrypted folder, the hidden logs, the clean audit reports. He had believed he was uncovering the fraud. But what if he had only been seeing what someone wanted him to see? Why didn't you tell me? Ethan demanded. Because we weren't sure who to trust, Richard answered. Access to your credentials isn't limited to me. Or you. The words landed hard. Maria's face flashed in Ethan's mind. Her fear. Her warning. Her sister's rejected scholarship application. Richard watched his reaction carefully. You came home early, he said. That complicates things. Complicates what? Ethan asked. Before Richard could answer, Ethan's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a message. It was a security alert from inside the house. Unauthorized access attempt. Children's wing. Ethan's heart dropped. He didn't wait. He turned and moved quickly toward the hallway. Richard close behind him. Upstairs, the corridor lights flickered once before stabilizing. Ethan could hear faint movement near his daughter's room. A door closing softly. Maria stood at the bottom of the staircase, pale. I just saw someone go up, she whispered. It wasn't Daniel. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. If someone was manipulating foundation funds, altering digital approvals, tamper with the security system, and now moving near his children, this wasn't just corporate fraud. This was pressure, calculated pressure. He took the stairs two at a time, his mind racing through possibilities. Was the black sedan outside a distraction or a backup? Had the security team been compromised? Behind him, Richard called out, Ethan, wait. We need to handle this carefully. Carefully. Ethan reached the top of the stairs and saw the faint glow from his son's bedroom door. It was slightly open. He slowed his steps. The house was silent again. Too silent. From downstairs, he heard the sound of the black sedan's engine revving. And then, in his pocket, his phone vibrated one more time. A single text message from an unknown number. You're looking in the wrong direction. Ethan's breath caught, because in that moment, standing outside his child's room while his billionaire empire, his charity foundation, and his own security network were unraveling at the same time, he realized this wasn't just about money. It was about leverage. And whoever was behind it had just proven they could reach the only thing Ethan Caldwell valued more than control. Ethan pushed the bedroom door open. His son was sitting on the edge of the bed, wide awake, tablet in his hands. The room was empty except for him. No intruder, no masked figure, just a child looking confused. Dad, his son asked softly, why are the lights flickering? Ethan scanned the room quickly, closet, balcony doors, bathroom. Clear. Relief washed over him, but it lasted only a second. This wasn't random. The security alert, the text message, the timing. Someone wanted him upstairs. Distracted, his phone buzzed again. Vault server access complete. Ethan's blood ran cold. He turned and ran back down the stairs, nearly colliding with Richard at the bottom. What happened? Richard asked. They're in the server, Ethan replied sharply. Right now. They both moved toward the study. Maria stood frozen near the hallway, watching them with wide, anxious eyes. Inside the study, the laptop screen had turned black. The external drive Ethan had placed in his inner pocket was gone. For half a second, his mind refused to process it. He looked down. His jacket pocket was open. Only 3 people had been close enough to him since he left the room. Maria, Richard, and Daniel, the security supervisor. Where's Daniel? Ethan asked quietly. Richard frowned. He said he was checking the perimeter. Ethan walked quickly toward the security office near the back entrance. The door was slightly open. The monitors inside were glitching, camera feeds looping in short segments. And Daniel was gone. On the desk, Ethan spotted something small, a security badge that didn't belong to Daniel. It belonged to his chief operations officer, the second layer. Richard stepped in behind him, staring at the screens. He's been running point on the emergency protocol. Richard said slowly, if anyone could trigger credential overrides without raising flags. It's him, Ethan finished. The pieces clicked together. The irregularities Richard mentioned, the clean audit reports, the filtered calls during his business trip, the carefully timed transfers from the Caldwell Foundation, the attempt to scare him upstairs while the vault server was accessed. This wasn't about Maria, and it wasn't about Richard trying to protect himself. It was about someone inside the company who had built trust over years, someone who understood systems, timing, and Ethan's habits. Ethan pulled out his phone and accessed the emergency lockdown protocol. Only he could activate. Within seconds, the gates sealed. Remote server access was cut. All digital credentials required biometric confirmation. Outside, the black sedan roared as it tried to exit, but the iron gates had already closed. Security alarms began to echo through the property. Maria appeared in the doorway. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice shaking. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. "You were right," he said quietly. "Someone was using my name." Minutes later, additional security units arrived. The black sedan's driver was detained at the gate. Inside the trunk, they found encrypted devices connected to Ethan's financial network. Evidence. Clean, organized, prepared. By midnight, the chief operations officer had been located at a downtown office building, attempting to finalize overseas transfers. The digital trail led directly to him. Months of calculated fraud hidden beneath strategic expansion projects. The Caldwell Foundation funds were frozen before they left the country. The scholarship accounts were restored. Richard stood beside Ethan in the quiet living room as the chaos settled. "You almost suspected the wrong person," Richard said gently. Ethan nodded. "I did." Across the room, Maria held a glass of water with trembling hands. "If you hadn't looked at that screen," Ethan said to her, "I might have stayed blind." She offered a small, tired smile. Sometimes the invisible people see the most. By early morning, the house was calm again. The children were asleep. The security systems were fully restored. The main conflict had been exposed and stopped before it could destroy his business, his foundation, or his family. Ethan finally allowed himself to breathe. But as he stood alone in his study, reviewing the recovered logs, something caught his eye. One final transfer request. Not authorized by the operations officer, not linked to Daniel, not routed through the known fraud accounts. It was smaller, subtle, almost invisible, and it had been initiated from inside the house. Time-stamped during the exact minute Ethan had been upstairs checking on his son. His gaze slowly shifted toward the hallway, toward the quiet kitchen, where Maria had been standing alone. The system required biometric confirmation for internal transfers, which meant whoever initiated it had physical access. Ethan felt a familiar weight of control slipping just slightly again, because while the main betrayal had been uncovered, the message on his phone still echoed in his mind. "You're looking in the wrong direction." Ethan stared at the screen for a long time, replaying the timestamp again and again. The transfer request had been small compared to the others, almost meaningless in size. But that was what made it dangerous. It felt like a test, a signal. He didn't storm into the kitchen. He didn't accuse anyone. Instead, he quietly checked the internal biometric log attached to that final request. The system recorded more than fingerprints. It tracked device proximity and network routing points inside the house. The access point wasn't the kitchen. It wasn't the hallway. It was his son's tablet. Ethan's breath slowed as understanding settled in. He walked upstairs again, this time calmly. His son was still awake, sitting against his pillows. "Dad, is everything okay?" the boy asked. Ethan sat beside him. "Can I see your tablet for a minute?" His son handed it over without hesitation. On the screen was a game window, but in the background, a browser tab was open. An email account, one Ethan didn't recognize. "Where did this come from?" Ethan asked gently. His son looked confused. "Uncle Mark helped me set it up. He said it was for my coding lessons." Uncle Mark, not a real uncle, a nickname the kids used for the chief operations officer. He had visited the house often, bringing small gifts, teaching them basic programming, earning their trust. Ethan felt a quiet anger rise, but not toward his child, toward himself. Mark had used the simplest path. He hadn't needed Maria. He hadn't needed to physically break into systems. He had planted a secondary access route through a device no one would suspect, a child's tablet connected to the home network. The final small transfer wasn't theft. It was a failsafe, a backdoor, meant to stay hidden even if the main fraud collapsed. Ethan closed the tablet and hugged his son tightly. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said softly. Downstairs, as dawn began to lighten the sky, Ethan called his cybersecurity team directly, not through assistants, not through filtered channels. He explained everything. Within hours, every device in the house was audited and resecured. The hidden email account was traced back to Mark's corporate credentials. By midday, law enforcement had expanded the charges: the attempted vault server breach, the foundation fraud, the manipulation of encrypted approvals, and now, unlawful digital access through a minor's device. The pieces finally aligned. Later that evening, Ethan stood in the living room with Maria and Richard. The house felt different, not tense, but honest. The scholarship funds are fully restored, Richard confirmed. Public disclosure will frame it as an internal audit correction. The Caldwell Foundation's reputation is intact. Ethan nodded. He turned to Maria. Your sister's application. Have her reapply. Personally. Tears filled her eyes. Thank you, sir. Ethan shook his head gently. No, thank you. After everything, he understood something important. Being a billionaire businessman wasn't about control alone. It was about responsibility, about protecting not just assets and expansion deals, but people. That night, when the house finally grew quiet, Ethan walked through each room slowly, not as a man guarding his empire, but as a father guarding his family. He had almost blamed the wrong person, almost let suspicion destroy loyalty, almost allowed distraction to cost him everything. The biggest lesson wasn't about fraud, cybersecurity, or corporate betrayal. It was about attention. The real threat hadn't come from the outside. It had grown quietly within trusted circles, hiding behind routine, comfort, and assumption. Ethan paused at the front door, looking out at the sealed gates that had once felt like protection. Control, he realized, isn't about walls or passwords. It's about awareness. And this time, the billionaire returned from a business trip didn't just uncover a conspiracy inside his mansion. He uncovered the blind spots inside himself. The house was still standing. The foundation was secure. His children were safe. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan Caldwell understood that true security doesn't come from power. It comes from knowing who and what you're trusting.